with The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Thursday, May 20th, 2021. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Jonathan Daniel Wells talking about Northerners' complicity in the maintenance of the slave trade. Meanwhile, Netanyahu has pushed back against Biden's delayed call for a ceasefire as the death tolls in Palestine continue to skyrocket. Bibi says he'll, quote, continue this operation until its aim is met. By its aim, he means his political ambitions. Bernie Sanders is set to back Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's bill attempting to block Biden's arms sale to Israel with a partner bill in the Senate. Senators will have to go on record about their stance here. Meanwhile, the ripple effects of Johnson & Johnson's contaminated vaccine batch are still being felt. The CEO acknowledged mold and unsanitary conditions at their Baltimore plant and said over 100 million doses are on hold. In Texas, Republican Governor Greg Abbott signs the equivalent of an abortion ban into law, banning the procedure after 6 weeks of pregnancy. Newsflash, by the way, a woman doesn't take notice about a missed period until at least a week after. This gives her 1 week to schedule the procedure, so this is a ban. Clearly unconstitutional, but still scary with the Supreme Court that we've got. Bank lobbyists are expressing frustration over Biden's $4 billion debt relief plan for black farmers, frustrated that they won't be able to maximize profits after decades of discriminatory loan practices. My heart just bleeds for them. Lula da Silva officially confirms he's running against Brazilian President Jair Bolsonaro in 2022. What a comeback. And lastly, hundreds of corpses are being found throughout India, scattered in rivers and rural areas, adding to speculation that India's right-wing leader, Narendra Modi, is covering up the true COVID death totals, even as the country set a record for deaths on Wednesday. All this and more on today's program. Welcome to the show, ladies and gentlemen. Sam is out today, but he has pre-recorded an interview with Jonathan Daniel Wells. It's a great interview. Can't wait for you guys to hear it. But first, let's start off with, and I'm sorry to do this to the audience, Ted Cruz. So Senator Ted Cruz went on Sean Hannity's program last night, accusing Joe Biden of sabotaging Benjamin Netanyahu's state-sponsored terrorism, the murder of Palestinians indiscriminately, shooting into refugee camps, damaging their COVID testing facilities, damaging all of their infrastructure, and they don't have the funds to rebuild it. I mean, all of that. But let's not get facts get in the way of Ted Cruz's talking points here. Here he is on Fox News last night.
9 months ago, in the Middle East, we had peace flowering everywhere. We had the Abraham Accords. I was at the White House for the signing of the Abraham Accords. Incredible victories that President Trump had won by standing strongly and unequivocally with Israel. Joe Biden came in, and in just 4 months, he's frittered all of that away. He's undermined Israel and Prime Minister Netanyahu. He sent over $100 million to the Palestinian Authority, with the PA, which is in bed with Hamas. Hamas, the terrorists that are firing those rockets you're showing right now, they've fired over 4,000 rockets into Israel, and every one of those rockets might as well have Joe Biden's name written on the side of it, because it is his weakness, his appeasement, his moral relativism and ambiguity, his lack of backbone to stand up and stand with Israel that is causing this war in the Middle East. Let me tell you what, Sean, what he ought to do. He ought to stand up and say, rather than lecturing Netanyahu, rather than being arrogant and attacking our friends, he ought to say, America stands unequivocally with Israel. Period. The end. The Hamas terrorists need to stop right now. Israel has an absolute right to defend itself. If Hamas terrorists attack Israel, they will be dealt with and they will be killed. And he needs to right now replenish Israel's Iron Dome missiles. They are firing missiles to intercept these Hamas rockets. They fired thousands of Iron Dome missiles, but you know, instead, Joe Biden is appeasing AOC and Tlaib and the radical left.
Okay, so this is one of those instances in which Ted Cruz is not going to be deterred by the facts on the ground. He kind of stopped himself there when he said what Biden needs to do is he needs to replenish the Iron Dome. Biden is trying right now to sell over $700 million in arms to Israel currently. He's not doing that to Palestine. No. So what he referenced, that $100 million figure that the administration is sending to Palestine, that was aid that Trump had cut off to Palestine. Biden reinstated that aid. And now he's sending $10 million for housing and for reconciliation projects with Israel. That is not the same as the over $700 million in arms that Biden is trying to send right now, and Bernie Sanders and AOC are trying to block it in the House and in the Senate. He conveniently leaves that out. And you don't really need to take my word for it, right? Here is Benjamin Netanyahu himself thanking Joe Biden for his support.
אני בא עכשיו מהבור בקריה, מחמ"ל המבצעים של צה"ל. זה מרשים ביותר. כל יום שעובר אנחנו פוגעים בעוד יכולות של ארגוני הטרור. מסכלים עוד מפקדים בכירים, מפילים עוד מגדלי טרור, פוגעים בעוד מצבורי נשק. כפי שאמרתי היום לשגרירים שנאספו כאן, זו הזכות הטבעית של ישראל. אני הערכתי מאוד את התמיכה של הממשלות האלה, ואני מעריך במיוחד את התמיכה של נשיא ארצות הברית, ידידנו ג'ו ביידן, בזכות ההגנה העצמית של מדינת ישראל. אני נחוש להמשיך במבצע הזה עד שיושג היעד שלו להחזיר את השקט והביטחון לכם, אזרחי ישראל.
Until the operation is achieved. So he thanks Joe Biden there. Why is Ted Cruz the spokesperson for Israel in this case? Pretty sure that the right-wing leader of Israel has a little bit more standing to comment on this issue. Joe Biden has been disastrous in his handling of this current conflict. He has given full rein to Israel to drop as many bombs as they want. And it's getting so old at this point, these talking points don't work. Claiming that Hamas started the conflict, that is unequivocally false. The Israeli government began displacing Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and then when that didn't work to spark violence to help Netanyahu's efforts at forming a governing coalition in the upcoming election, then they stormed the Al-Aqsa Mosque. I always say it closer to Alaska, and I tried to stop myself there, and brutalized worshipers during a holy celebration multiple times. Wow, then there's retaliation. What do you know? But the retaliation, that's the terror. Those are the terrorists, because they don't have the power and the money to get out of, and the whiteness often, and the backing by the United States, to get out of being called terrorists, because they're not an official state. They've been denied statehood repeatedly by the United States, by Israel, by their influence. And so I guess when you're an official state, you are able to kind of squirm out of being called terrorists. But what Israel is doing on an exponentially larger level is terrorism in and of itself, is it not? They're targeting civilians. They're targeting healthcare infrastructure. They're targeting refugee camps. If you heard Hamas was doing that, Ted Cruz, you know you'd call it terrorism.
They're bombing the roads to hospitals and then bombing the hospitals.
Yeah, yes, they're bombing hospitals. If that doesn't count as terrorism, and by the way, as we've mentioned multiple times on this program, Israel has the ability to target their bombs, and Hamas's / Palestine's much weaker bombs, they go wherever they land. There's no ability for them to target where they're going to end up. And that's evidenced by the fact that, you know, essentially the Israeli bombs have been so much more targeted and very specific. The fact that they went after multiple Palestinian news sources and then also international ones, including Al Jazeera and the AP, are indicative of that.
Well, it says everything that the metric Ted Cruz uses is number of rockets fired and not Israeli casualties, right?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the entire point of the obfuscation. And there's nobody who can get himself more worked up around a false narrative than Ted Cruz. His feigned outrage there, it was so transparent that he just essentially was trying. He started with his conclusion, oh, Biden's weak on Israel. And then he worked backwards from it, and you can kind of see him trying to play act in that situation, or LARP, or whatever the case may be. So,
it's a little presidential too, or, you know, his perception of challenging Biden in a presidential executive type tone.
Yeah, please don't put that thought in my head, Brendan. We are going to take a quick break, and when we come back, Sam will be interviewing, I'm so sorry, I have it in my notes, I am scrolling up, Jonathan Daniel Wells, and we will be right back with that interview.
We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It's a real pleasure to welcome to the program Jonathan David Wells. He is a professor of history at the University of Michigan and the author of The Kidnapping Club, Wall Street, Slavery, and the Resistance on the Eve of the Civil War. Professor, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I really appreciate it.
Okay, so let's start. What I find fascinating about this story, in addition just sort of the history being fascinating, is this is a story of race, and it's a story of class, and it is a story also of almost like a pincer move in terms of class on these free Black kids, sometimes women, men, where they're getting it. The context is in many ways set by Wall Street, and some of the pressure and animosity is coming from the sort of the pitting of Black freed people and white working class, I guess maybe early immigrants as well. So let's start though, because your story starts in the mid to earlier 1800s. In many respects, but give us the context of the relationship between New York and Wall Street in particular, and the in the South. And obviously this has to do with, and you know, it's been a couple of years, but you know, things like King Cotton, and one being the sort of the natural resource and the other being the financing of this.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. In fact, New York today, as we all know, is this amazing place, right? It's a pluralistic, you know, politically progressive city. It's very lively. It's got so much to offer in terms of culture. But unfortunately, the history of New York City harbors a much darker, a much bleaker past. And that's kind of what I wanted to write about in the book. And you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the reasons why New York turns out to be so strongly pro-South, and even to some degree pro-slavery, is because of Wall Street's connections to the cotton trade in the South, which of course is all being harvested on the backs of enslaved people. So all that cotton that needs to be baled up as raw materials needs to make its way through the ports of the American South, and then ultimately to the factories in the United Kingdom or in the New England states. and they have to be then turned into finished products, right? All the nice fine linens and clothing and curtains that people will enjoy in their fine homes. So it's New York financiers that help to facilitate the movement of raw materials, the cotton, to the places where they'll be turned into finished products. So Wall Street is not the behemoth yet in this period of American history that we come to know today. It's on its way to becoming sort of, the sort of massive financial center that it is today. But nonetheless, I think it's a really good sort of shorthand for what New York City, particularly Lower Manhattan, is becoming, in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, those decades right before the Civil War. So much of the wealth and much of the power of New York City as it grows into a world financial capital is unfortunately built on the backs of enslaved labor in the South.
So it's basically mercantile and financial forces, and that encompasses, I can imagine, now we should say, slavery is outlawed in New York in 1827, I think it is. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, how much of the economy in the establishment of, like, what made up the politics at that time were, reliant, like you say, in Southern New York? I mean, it maybe you should just give us also like a broader picture of like what New York was like at that point. Like, I think at that point there's still like fields by the time you get up until like the I don't know, the 70s or up by Central Park but mercantile, then that being everything that's involved with ships coming in to the harbor and everything associated with that, and finance must have been fairly powerful. I mean, I can't, like, what else would there be at that time?
So that's absolutely right. We're talking about a city with hundreds of thousands of people. I mean, even by the time we get to this 1830s, 40s, and 50s. So, it's not a little tiny town. It's well on its way to becoming the New York City that we know. And one of the things that makes the city so prosperous, as I mentioned, is in fact the cotton trade. But it's also because New York is very democratic, and I mean, party Democratic Party. And as I'm sure your listeners know, that the political parties are fundamentally different in this period of American history than they are today. It's 180 degrees difference. So the party that's really the most intransigent, the most conservative and reactionary when it comes to race is the Democratic Party. And so, if Donald Trump was alive in the 1840s and 50s, maybe he was, then, he would have been a Democrat. And it's the Democratic Party that is so beholden to the South, not only because of the cotton trade, but because they want to keep this prosperous union together. And if your listeners will go back to, maybe back in grade school, they'll remember that one of the features of the nation's founding document, the Constitution itself, has a feature called the Fugitive Slave Clause. And that meant that if you were somehow able to make it to freedom, if you were a person of color, an enslaved person in Georgia or Texas or the Carolinas, and you made it somehow to New York City, that didn't mean you were free, even though New York state's laws, along with Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, say we are getting rid of slavery. In fact, the Constitution required that you would be returned to your quote unquote master. And so, the Democratic Party is so willing to sacrifice Black human beings, and as you mentioned, men, women, and children, on this altar of keeping the Union together. They want to make the white South happy. They want to prove, that they're not radicals, that they're willing to abide by the Constitution. That's really, what combines to make New York City really the most pro-slavery, pro-South city north of the Mason-Dixon line. And that's quite a statement, because these things are also going on in Boston and Philly. But New York is kind of unique in the extent to which the political system, the legal system, the economic system is all geared against the interests of Black New Yorkers.
All right, and now, and that's the sort of the impetus we've described in terms of those who were financially invested in the success of the South and the maintenance of the Union. And then I would imagine too, at that time, on a local level, we are in an era where there's, it's very much about like, how many votes can I get that come off this boat tomorrow? And this is going to enhance my political power on a local level. And those, working class immigrants who may not be considered white in the way that they're considered white today, because they are from a different country, right? But there is still value in creating and a some type of like resent for competition about who can get these low wage jobs. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. We're talking about Irish immigrants here, coming in the 1840s and 1850s by the millions. And when they go to places like New York City, they need jobs, they need places to live. And here comes the Democratic Party with its power base in Tammany Hall in New York City. And the Tammany Hall machine, the political machine, was heavily dependent on Irish immigrant support. And they are absolutely concerned about competing for jobs in the warehouses of the city, jobs along the wharves of the Battery and the East River and the Hudson Rivers, loading and unloading ships, the real heavy duty work. They resent having to compete with Black laborers for those kinds of positions. And so the animosity, the level of hostility toward the city's Black population is just, is really hard to fathom today. It's so extensive. And even though I don't really cover this in the book, there are other historians who have looked at the draft riots during the Civil War in 1863 in July. And that's when we see the Irish working class really going on a stampede day after day for almost an entire week against Black New Yorkers. So, it's again, it's very different from the way we think of New York today. It's troubled and wrought by ethnic conflicts, racial tensions, class dissension. And on top of that, of course, are the political battles that are going on in the city for every level of office. So it's a place that far from, sort of a place where Black people can feel at ease, or somehow, even if they were runaways, they can sort of take a deep breath. They're constantly looking over their shoulders for somebody who might be arresting them as a runaway. And for many of them, it really wasn't until they crossed the border into Canada, which was the real land of the free in this period of history, when they were finally out of the reach of the US government.
I want to talk about how the Underground Railroad plays into this, actually. I mean, in fact, on my way to work, very often I go by a place on Duffield Street in Brooklyn. I don't know if you came across this, that was, I think there is some belief that it was part of the railroad. So let's talk about the Kidnapping Club. I mean, when did did they refer to themselves as the Kidnapping Club? I mean, when did this club begin? And we should say, when we're talking about slavery is outlawed in 1827, which means that you have free Black folk there. Occasionally, or I don't know, how you put into context how many Black folk were in the city who had escaped other places. So they would still be subject to the Fugitive Slave Clause, which then is subsequently outlawed repealed in 1850. Give us a sense of like the timing of all this and how everything sequences.
Yeah, sure. So the Fugitive Slave Clause is pretty clear in the Constitution. It says northern states, northern communities have to return people who are accused of being runaways. But it doesn't really provide any mechanism for doing that. There's no teeth in the law. And it's really the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 that reinforces the clause and says, now we're going to have a system in place. We're going to have U.S. Marshals. We're going to have a bureaucracy to appease the white South so that we ensure that we can return as many runaways as is feasible.
And the idea, I should be clear, is to maintain. I mean, I presumably the clause itself, and then the sort of the mechanism that's set up in 1850 is at first is probably just sort of a way so that we can feel unity, right? Like we have a relationship that is different than if we were a different country. You don't need extradition papers. It's just it is what it is, and then this as an attempt to sort of maintain this unity, we're even going to develop an apparatus.
That's right. A large, significant government apparatus to make the return of runaways all the easier. And this is where the Kidnapping Club comes in. So the name actually comes from a Black abolitionist named David Ruggles, who is, in my mind, somebody really deserving of much more attention from modern day Americans than he is given. He is really the hero of the book that I've written. And he's the one that slaps this label on them, the New York Kidnapping Club. It's not really a social club. It's not a social organization, although, Manhattan is still small enough that they all know each other. But instead, it's a group of police officers, judges, and slave catchers, U.S. Marshals. And together, they really do everything they can to make freedom precarious for Black people. And David Ruggles is one of these activists who is just so tireless and just so, seemingly everywhere at once. And he's on the lookout for any signs of racial injustice, including times when the New York police officers so-called, arrest somebody so-called for being a runaway. And they don't really care whether the person is a runaway or, had been generations of freedom in their families. And so a couple of guys in particular, a guy named Tobias Boudinot and another guy named Daniel Nash. These are two police officers. And they would, simply arrest somebody on the street and say, I'm taking you before the recorder Riker, Richard Riker, who was kind of the city's judge.
Was Rikers Island named after him? That was
no,
just coincidence.
No, yeah, but of course, it's a testament to the city's Dutch heritage, right? I mean,
right,
the Riker name, but it might as well have been for even if it's not factual. I mean, the truth is that this is a period in which Black lives are expendable, and Richard Riker, who is the city recorder, is unfortunately for the city's Black residents, the one who's charged with deciding officially whether Joe Smith is in fact somebody who ran away in 1832 from a Virginia plantation, or is Joe Williams, who has been born in New York City to free parents, in 1820. So the bad news is that particularly at the height of the nefarious activities of the Kidnapping Club, particularly in the 1830s, they can sweep somebody off the streets of New York within hours, take them, these individuals before Richard Riker. Riker declares that they're a runaway slave without caring very much whether they are, really a runaway or not. And that person is taken away to Southern slavery before, the family members even know they're missing. So it's a efficient, very cruel group of New York power brokers who are making life miserable for the 15 to 20,000 or so Black people who live in New York City in this period of American history.
And the mayor is at least providing some air cover, I guess, for this too on some level. You're right. And how much of this was just racism? How much of it was like sort of commodified at that point? And tell folks like what would happen. Like where do they drop them off? I mean, they just take them to I guess like a slave brokerage house essentially, because some of these people they're obviously not slaves, so there's no plantation owner coming up and going, that's my property. Walk us through the mechanics of this.
Well, believe it or not, there were many, many white slave owners who go to New York City, who go to Boston, who go to Philadelphia. They maybe catch word somehow that their so-called escaped property has made it to Philadelphia. And so they and maybe, some other thugs that they hire, search the city streets for these individuals. And it's remarkable how often, at least in their minds, that they find the person that they're looking for, despite, the growing size.
But they're not really finding, I mean, a big part of that is like, that guy looks like he would be a good slave. That's my slave.
That's unfortunately, we will never know, because you're absolutely right. They could make that claim, and there's very little in the law that is standing in the way until we get jury trials in New York State. And that begins to happen in the 1840s. And that's sort of what causes the kidnapping club's machinery to start grinding to a halt, because no longer can you just take somebody off the street, take them before the recorder Riker, and in 2 hours they're on a boat, with a slave catcher whose, job it is, profession it is, to take people into slavery. Now you have to have a jury trial where you're allowed to present evidence. So that's part of the story of the unfolding of freedom and the decline of the Kidnapping Club. But it's just unbelievable how terrorized the Black communities were in New York City. And we're talking about, people who had for generations established lively communities and neighborhoods in New York City, all the way back to the 17th century. There were very vibrant and vigorous and healthy Black families in Black neighborhoods. One of them was called Seneca Village, and it was wiped out to create Central Park in the 1850s, completely wiped off the map. And, I think when I was writing this book, and I think maybe from the perspective of readers, they'll sympathize with this too, as bleak and as dark as the stories tend to be, you also have to admire and be inspired by, I think, the fact that guys like David Ruggles were part of these vibrant Black communities and were literally risking their lives to promote racial justice. And you mentioned Brooklyn. There are actually slaves being held in the heart of Brooklyn in the late 1830s.
I was going to say, tell that story about Ruggles. He goes across the river and because he hears about a couple of slaves. I mean, so slavery is outlawed in 1827, but there's still a vibrant Black market, if you will, of slaves. But talk about what Ruggles did in that one occasion.
So Ruggles catches wind of the fact that there's a family in Brooklyn who is holding Black enslaved people at their house. And he was fearless, Ruggles. I mean, he was somebody who was just, he wouldn't shy away from a fight. So he literally goes across the ferry. There's no bridge to Brooklyn at this point. So he goes across the ferry, finds the house in the heart of Brooklyn, and knocks on the door. And as it turns out, the Dodge family lives there. They were originally from Savannah, and they have taken 3 of their enslaved people to the heart of Brooklyn. And Ruggles says, look, you can't do this. It looks like the guy, the father of the family, the patriarch is not there. So he has to deal with the woman of the household. And he sees down in the basement these 3 enslaved people, and he goes down to talk to them, brushes his way past the woman of the house down to the basement and says, "You are free. You are not enslaved in the state of New York, in the city of Brooklyn." And, he recounts all of this almost word for word in a newspaper that he publishes called The Mirror of Liberty. And this is what allows me and other historians to really tell these stories in such rich detail. The fact that Ruggles records these encounters with such a striking degree of detail really allows us to sort of reinsert ourselves into that situation. So
the woman says something to the effect of like, oh, these slaves don't want to leave because they'll be disoriented without me. And one of the slaves said, we're disoriented because you're hitting us.
yeah, she says something like to one of the enslaved young women, you know, you can't do without me. And the woman answers back, yeah, well, you hit me on the head enough times that, I get dizzy spells. And, the woman of the house says to the enslaved people, in fact, isn't it true that you're actually free, you're not enslaved? And they answer, well, that's what you told us to tell anybody who asks, like David Ruggles. So it's pretty clear what's going on.
From a legal perspective, if you're a slave and I mean, this is the sort of the weird dynamic, right? Because if they stay in Savannah and these slaves come up to New York, they can legally be sent back. But if the family takes them up to New York, then they become freed, right?
Isn't that ironic? Yeah. And it's only through if anybody notices. I mean, there are many, many dozens of cases here, a lot of them involving David Ruggles, but God knows how many there were that we'll never know about. I mean, even a person like Ruggles, who was tirelessly patrolling the city, undoubtedly missed untold numbers of people who were ensnared in the web of the Kidnapping Club.
I mean, there's a quality that he reminds me of. There was a guy, I don't know what happened to him. He may still be around, but who was in New York. I think he was in New York, who was basically would just roam the streets with a phone camera when they became sort of first ubiquitous and would capture these incidences of police abuse. I want to talk a little bit about the parallels between what was happening with the Kidnapping Club and ICE on some level over the past couple of years in a moment. But tell us the story of Henry Scott. I mean, one of the things that I think that your book does, in part because Ruggles provided at least part of your primary source material, is it's like a modern day account. I mean, it is it's I don't know, not quite an ethnography, obviously, but you get a real sense of like people's lives and the fears. Tell us about Henry Scott.
So that's one of the more troubling chapters of the book, one of the more difficult instances. So Henry Scott is 7 years old. And according to a white slave owner from North Carolina, Henry Scott had been taken by his father, who was also an enslaved man, and they left a Virginia plantation and made it to freedom in New York City. And so Henry Scott is at his school desk one Saturday at the African Free School, which were the primary ways that Black children were educated in this period. And as he's sitting, the door to the classroom bursts open, and there are two white men standing in the doorway. One of them is a sheriff, and the other is a white slave owner from North Carolina, and they claim that Henry and his father are in fact runaway slaves. And you can just imagine the pandemonium that would have broken out in the classroom of grade school children. I mean, they're crying, they're hiding under their desks, they run out the door and the windows. It's really heartbreaking, and it's a very scarring incident on the generation of Black New Yorkers living there at the time. And one of the more touching revelations, there are children in the African Free Schools who learn about this case, and they gather pennies, from their parents or grandparents or around the house. And for example, the girls in one of the African Free Schools, they gather together $2 worth of pennies. And the goal is to help contribute to little Henry Scott's legal defense, because that's what he needs now. After being accused of running away. Unfortunately for both Henry Scott and his father, they are brought before Richard Riker, sort of the apex at the top of the Kidnapping Club. And once again, he doesn't really care that much whether they are in fact free or enslaved. They sit in prison, And Riker actually allows the white slave owner to go back to North Carolina to gather more evidence to prove that these people are enslaved, including Henry Scott. And ultimately, it seems that the community came together and purchased the freedom of Henry Scott and his father. But as I said, I mean, this was a scarring incident on the city. And by the way, you know, this did happen sometimes, that the Black community or even white abolitionists, you know, there were white anti-slavery activists too, and they would raise money to purchase the freedom. So basically they're paying off the master to say, okay, this person is free now. But you can imagine that's kind of complicated morally, right? Because not only are you handing a substantial amount of money over to a slave owner, but you're also in some way legitimizing the system, you know, through a business transaction. But, you know, there were many anti-slavery activists, including Black activists, who said, yes, you know, by purchasing freedom for somebody, in a way, we're conducting business with a slave owner, but this is what we're forced to do in these kind of circumstances. So there's a lot of other examples, but Henry Scott's story is one of the most painful.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, that's at the top of the list. If is there any other that stands out for you that is, I think, indicative or that you think is indicative of that time and any of the sort of the unique dynamics that are happening there?
Yeah, there are so many that exhibit just a startling amount of callousness, but there's one young woman, her name is Hester Carr, and she is in fact born free. She's born free to free parents. She works for a doctor in New York. It's possible that she had some kind of cognitive disability of some kind, but she is demonstrably free. She has, you know, a very clear heritage that indicates her free status. And yet she is tricked by a woman who says, well, if you come down to Virginia with me, I'll pay you much more than this doctor in New York is paying you to keep our house. And she goes with the woman willingly. And then as soon as she gets off the train in Virginia, the white woman who is her traveling companion has her locked in jail and then sells her as a slave. Before she can even be removed from jail, Hester Carr dies in prison at the age of, I think, 22. But it just shows you, you know, just the tremendous inhumanity that is existing here. And by the way, I need to mention, I think, you know, it's not a matter of pointing to New York or Brooklyn and saying, well, look, isn't you know, aren't these northern cities just as evil as what's going on in the American South, right? It's just not an attempt to in any way reduce the horrors of American slavery in the South, the crimes of generations of white slave owners that they inflicted on humanity. But it is to say that here we are in New York City, America's great capitalist metropolis, booming example of a financial world center, and right here in the heart of Manhattan, we see slavery, we see the cheapening and expendability of Black lives. And it just reminds us how much of the nation's whole history is bound up with this past.
I mean, I'm also struck too that the relationship between we're here in this major capitalist center that is developed and has finance and whatnot, and this is happening. It's not. In many respects, it's not. Despite the fact that we're in a capitalist center, that this is happening, it is in many respects a function of that, right? I mean, all of these stories involve the commodification of these human beings. There is a definitive, and even in the context that makes it that sort of like creates the ambiance in which this can happen. It's all driven in some respects by by our economic system.
Absolutely. And it's part of the reason why New Yorkers look the other way. Not just the powerful in the police departments or people in the judiciary, or people in the, on Wall Street, whether they're bankers or financiers or merchants or insurance agents, they're all willing to look the other way because they know exactly how the city is growing, both in terms of its wealth and its power. And one of the things I think is really interesting here is sort of the evolution of the average sort of white New Yorker on this story, because I say white New Yorker because Black New Yorkers were already very clearly aware of how evil slavery was. And the fact that many white New Yorkers who thought maybe slavery was not really their concern, slavery is a Southern problem. I'm in New York. What do I have to do with it? I could care less. When people are being seized on the streets of the city, possibly people who were born free and may have lived in the city for 30 or 40 years, well, it's much harder to make this claim that slavery is merely a Southern phenomenon, without which, we New Yorkers have little to do. So, there is a sort of coming abolitionist sort of anti-slavery sentiment, and that's part of the story too. That, as callous and as cruel as the city could be, increasing numbers of white New Yorkers are coming to see not only that the Fugitive Slave Clause in the Constitution and the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850 are fundamentally immoral, but maybe there's something wrong with the Union itself. And we sometimes, I think, really think about the coming of the Civil War as, okay, well, this is a Southern story, right? Because Southerners are the ones who secede. They're the ones who are so beholden to slavery. But we forget sometimes that Northerners could have said, fine, leave the Union. Don't let the door hit you in the rear end on the way out. But they didn't. Northerners, many of them formerly moderate, sort of fence-sitting, uncaring white Northerners, also had to come to the conclusion that there was something wrong with the Union. And they also had to sort of be willing to lay a great deal of money and a great deal of lives on the line.
So lastly, how does this apparatus end in New York? I mean, I guess really, and I mean, I imagine the Civil War makes it finalize it. But was it? I guess, absent the Civil War, does this end on its own accord? Does New York rise up and say, like, we're just not going to, I don't know, is it like the equivalent of like, you know what, we're not signing that agreement. Our sheriff is not signing the agreement with ICE, and I don't care what the feds say. Yeah,
if only that were the case. So it's really important and a good question. Here's the irony. So the Kidnapping Club that I write about is on the decline by the 1840s, in part because, as I mentioned before, the institution now jury trials. So it makes it harder just to, take somebody and immediately whisk them away. But right at the time that the Kidnapping Club is declining, we see a dramatic rise. This is not something we got a chance to talk about, but it's in the book, and readers can check it out. The fact that New York City is a port in the transatlantic slave trade that had been done away with, made illegal by Congress way early in the 1800s. And here we are in the 1840s, and even on the cusp of the Civil War in the 1850s and in 1860 and 61, where New York is one of the fundamental cities, along with Havana, Cuba, engaged in this horrific West African transatlantic slave trade. So I wish it were a story of New Yorkers sort of coming to, realize the immorality and justice of the system as a whole. Unfortunately, it's something that continues to the Civil War and beyond. And that's kind of what I'm working on in my next book. And I'll just finish by saying, there's a newspaper that is published every week in New York City during the Civil War and during the period after the war. And here's the title of it. It's called the New York Weekly Caucasian. It's a white supremacist newspaper, and it's spread all across the country, and it comes right from the heart of New York. So
I mean,
it doesn't get any better, unfortunately, in many ways.
Well, it's not. I mean, I guess 40 years later, there's massive, Madison Square Gardens filled with KKK members. 20 or 30,000, I think, were there. I mean, it's not. Jonathan David Wells, professor of history, University of Michigan. The book is The Kidnapping Club, Wall Street Slavery and Resistance on the Eve of the Civil War. We'll put a link to that at majority.fm. Thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for inviting me.
Excellent interview there that Sam did. I always appreciate some historical context and some I guess just clarification on our history, because so much of it is papered over. Before we go, I wanted to talk about this clip with Tim Ryan. So Tim Ryan is running for the Senate. He is currently a member of the House of Representatives, and he had a very fiery speech on the House floor about the many Republican leaders who have decided that they aren't interested in a bipartisan commission to find out really what happened during the January 6th insurrection. Here is Tim Ryan on the House floor.
I want to thank the gentleman from New York and the other Republicans who are supporting this, and thank them for their bipartisanship. To the other 90% of our friends on the other side of the aisle, holy cow. Incoherence. No idea what you're talking about. Benghazi, you guys chased the former Secretary of State all over the country, spent millions of dollars. We have people scaling the Capitol, hitting the Capitol Police with lead pipes across the head, and we can't get bipartisanship. What else has to happen in this country? Cops. This is a slap in the face to every rank and file cop in the United States. If we're going to take on China, if we're going to rebuild the country, if we're going to reverse climate change, we need two political parties in this country that are both living in reality, and you ain't one of them. I yield back the balance.
That was a political ad. Or something that it might actually not be allowed. You might not be able to use footage. I'm not exactly sure of the rules. Does that apply to House floor speeches?
I'm not sure of that.
Yeah, well, that's why, I mean, I think the Kristen Sinema thumbs down, there was some technicality where they weren't going to be able to use that footage. But regardless, the goal isn't bipartisanship, Tim Ryan. I understand his outrage about this. I mean, the fact that Republicans, many of whom would have been targeted by these insurrectionists, these QAnon folks, many who rioted and who stormed the Capitol, they are bowing down to their daddy, Donald Trump, and they are essentially saying, well, my political fate and my career is in the hands of these Trumpies and these MAGA folks, so I'm not going to do anything to anger them by supporting this commission, and who cares if my life was at risk? I'm going to get beyond that. I'm going to stuff that down real low.
I mean, I don't think they even feel like they're I think this is bigger than Trump. I think this is just all these Republicans are anti-majoritarian, they're anti-democratic, and this is this isn't a security issue. The problem is January 6th was not a security problem. It was a political problem. I'm sorry, but when you have a party saying an election was stolen in any country, you can expect some part of the population to react pretty aggressively toward that. And I think that's frankly justifiable. The problem is you have a party predicated on lying about it, and they are still predicated on lying about it. So of course they're not going to want to investigate January 6th, because the real thing that needs investigating about January 6th is a party predicated about lying on the election. And
yes. And
they cannot go past that.
Well, they also don't want to set a precedent in this instance because they can't acknowledge that they lied about the results of the election, because they're going to do it again. They are going to do it again. Stop the Steal has been in the works in the Roger Stone pipeline for decades at this point. This was part of the effort to stop the recount in 2000. Roger Stone also behind that, much of the same people who are involved in this. This is a part of the playbook, so they have to kind of deny the results of it in order to use that same playbook again, right? But back to Tim Ryan, he's in the right, but the goal is not bipartisanship. the fact that you're focusing on bipartisanship is frustrating in and of itself and is indicative of the kind of credence that you shouldn't be giving to the GOP, because this is always who they've been. But really, I would be more annoyed if I wasn't aware that this was being used literally just for his Senate campaign. The fact that he shoehorned China in the middle of there, come on, dude. I mean, the grandstanding, I get it's going to work. It was seemingly targeted to Ohio. But for me, it was a bit cringe-inducing. However, it is outrageous. And yeah, I'm having a hard time.
It undercuts the argument about how outrageous the Republican Party is, because we're still entertaining it, that we're still outraged about it. We should move beyond that understanding, because it's the same thing with, like, how about these fossil fuel supported scientists? Like, why won't you guys get it about climate change? They are fundamentally, like, their existence is about not getting that. So of course they're going to be anti-democratic. So you need to move on and, like,
codependence.
Yeah, convey reality instead of your exasperation and, you know, outrage, which is frankly, like, it's cheap at this point.
We are unfortunately out of time. Thank you guys so much for tuning in on the Peacock app. We will see you tomorrow. Except for the rest of us, we'll be seeing you now. We will be joined by old Matt. But first, I want to ask everybody, become a Majority Report member. If you like this show, if you care about this show, if you care about the future of this show, we could definitely use your support. And please just go to majority.fm. You get the fun half and you get the free show without ads. And yeah, it's just a great way and a cheap way to support the show. So if you guys have the ability, please do that. Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning and such?
Yeah, looking forward tonight on Left Reckoning 8 Eastern. We're having Brandon Sutton on. We're going to talk about masks. I'm interested in masks sort of as a culture war topic, and how, like, who really needs that. I think it's kind of clear which side really wants the mask issue to be one that drives people apart. But and then we're going to talk about Breyer and why he needs to retire. And I just realized his name rhymes with that, so retire Breyer.
Retire Breyer. Hashtag retire Breyer.
That's tonight. Patreon.com/leftreckoning to access David Griscom and I in the post game. We are, I think, 2 patrons shy of 800. So if you would like to be the 800th, you might have a chance for that tonight. So patreon.com/leftreckoning. Subscribe to the YouTube channel as well. And we don't have Matt Binder yet.
Wow.
We'll have to do Binder plugs at the end, maybe.
He must be staying away because he knows that I'm going to be controlling the phones today.
Wow.
Yeah, right? I'm in Sam's seat, so I got the phone power. Check out Nomi's show, the Nomi Keys show, at 3 p.m. today, Tuesday through Friday. But she also has a guest host on Mondays. And yeah, should we just head into the fun half and hopefully Binder shows his beautiful face? All right, guys. Wait, what's the number? 646-257-3920. Goddamn, I got it. See you in the fun half.
Woo. For it. All right, folks. 646-257-3920. See you in the fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back. Boy is back. And the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Dannerky's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danner.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
Psych. Fuck them. Fuck them. That's what? Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
and the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
When you see Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keeping it 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Fuck things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy. I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
Welcome to the fun half, and by the skin of his teeth, Binder has arrived. How you doing, Binder?
I'm doing good. I was having some issues for some reason. My virtual camera wasn't showing up in the Zoom video output, but suddenly I restarted and there it was. So all is good now.
Wonderful.
Do you use the virtual camera from like OBS to do your green screen? Is that what you're doing?
Yes, not OBS, but a similar software called Ecamm Live. That's exactly what I'm doing though.
So it says I'm into the phone system. Here we go. We got some calls rolling in. Let's take this first call right here. Calling from a 917 number. Seems like a New Yorker. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Yes, it is.
Hello.
It's Alex from New York.
Alex from New York. Oh, are you calling in with a matchup for
I am.
For the four of us?
Indeed.
Tell us.
You ready?
Yeah.
Today we got Milo Yiannopoulos and Charlie Kirk versus each other, and then Ann Coulter and Lara Ingram.
Okay.
Wait, what are we doing here?
Fight Club.
Oh, so what was it again? It was Milo and Charlie Kirk?
Versus Charlie Kirk. I figure they're both very tall and thin. And Ann Coulter and Ingram, because they're both skeletons.
I would say Ingram probably takes Coulter. And Kirk takes over Milo. Why do I say that? I think Ingram is teetering on the edge of just insanity. I think she is ready to go. Whereas we've seen all we've seen of Ann Coulter. I think there's nothing like she's out there, but I think Ingram's got a lot of pent up rage.
Of course.
Yes, and I think Kirk, on account of him always on his show sniffling and touching his nose, he would probably be on something, and he would also rage against Milo. I don't think Milo has a physical fight in him, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I mean, he does seem pretty vain. I immediately thought of Milo, and I tried to look up Charlie Kirk's height, and like some weird website says he's 5'7", but then I just looked at pictures of him standing next to Trump, who's over 6 feet, and Charlie Kirk's got to be like 6'4" or something.
Yeah, he's you're right about that. He was when Sam and him debated. I was like Sam's producer that weekend out in LA, and he chatted with Charlie before, trying to like psych him out. Like Sam was very intent on like psyching Charlie out before the debate, and Charlie's pretty tall, to be fair. He's like 6'3" or 6'4".
For some reason, I just like I think of Milo Yiannopoulos as probably the dirtiest fighter I could think of. Like I just think because he goes to such extreme lengths to humiliate himself, and how depraved and messed up he is. I'm gonna take Milo in this instance, but I will side with Laura Ingraham because I feel like she's probably got a little bit more behind her punch. I've actually seen Ann Coulter in person a few times. I appeared on a show after her. And she is thin as hell. Very, very thin, which is not news to anybody. But in person, it's like, it's...
Yeah, whereas when Laura Ingraham puts up the Nazi salute at the conservative convention, at the GOP convention, you know, you can see those guns on her.
Yeah, so we're split on Milo versus, we're split on Milo versus Charlie, but I think okay, awesome. Thanks so much, Alex.
Take care. Have a good day.
Have a good one. Always appreciate the fight clubs. All right, we'll take another call. Scrolling. All right. Calling from an 818 number, 818.
Hey, what's up, Emma, crew? How are you guys doing?
Hey, Dave from Jamaica. What's up, man?
Not much. I think I have to disagree. I think Kirk would win. As an experienced fighter myself, if you have a very small face, you can't land a vital blow because if you're going to try to punch him in the eye, you're going to hit his forehead. You know? So,
that's a great point. You look at Charlie Kirk's face; he's got all that like noggin that can just soak up a punch and very small actual face material. So he
right.
protected.
Soft stuff. The soft stuff is small.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Where did this whole conversation come from? I feel like I missed something. What you guys were doing a fight club today earlier in the show?
In like many a time and gives us these incredible matchups and we have to debate it.
All right, I guess I've always missed them. Jeez.
So why are you calling, Dave? How are you?
Well, it's to speak about the Palestine-Israel conflict, if you can call it that, is that the I think people don't understand how effective the right-wing propaganda, I'm talking like right-wing Israelis, have been in converting a large chunk of their populace, because I've been kind of hearing this stuff for decades. Like, I remember when my father used to do electrical engineering work for Israel, like over 30 years ago. And he would say that the blatant racism casually you'd see on the street is like, even for 30 years ago, it was like, wow. I think it was something like might have been a World Cup match going on at some point. And there was two Israelis at the bar, and they were just making racist joke after racist joke because there was some African team on them. And my dad is kind of a conservative guy, and even he was like, this is kind of like beyond the pale. But I don't know how it got to this state, though. But, like, there was Abby Martin, and she was just talking to average Israelis and how willingly they were pro-genocide of Palestinians. It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around.
Yeah.
Have you all noticed this as well?
Well, I mean, it's uncomfortable to talk about, right? But the entire, like much of like Israeli Jews in Israel are supportive of these far-right policies. And I think a lot of that is what's like propaganda, racist propaganda that's been fairly ubiquitous. And then also just like the constant us versus them, the feeling of being under siege in that small area that's been pushed onto them for a long time. And then I also think there's a lot of internalized trauma and a repetition of patterns based on, historically what happened to a lot of the families of Jewish people who settled in Israel. Matt, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, don't worry about it. No, I think that's a really good point. But I think to stick with exactly with your question on the right too in Israel. I mean, they are they're the government. I mean, they're the ones in charge, and the people who are on the far right in Israel certainly feel emboldened by the Netanyahu government. And I mean, I don't know if you guys saw this piece just the other day. You might have talked about it on the show. But there were like disinformation reporters in Israel who had seen things going around in Israel, like just how like here we have like, you know, the Proud Boys or Patriot Prayer, like get on Telegram or WhatsApp or something to you know, organize together, meet somewhere and cause some real problems. Over there was that in the news, there was that Arab-owned ice cream shop in Israel that got destroyed. And that was pre-planned, premeditated. The disinformation reporters over there found the WhatsApp, was sent the WhatsApp groups where this was being organized, had even warned Israeli police hours before they actually went down there and destroyed this ice cream shop. And obviously, the Israeli police didn't do anything because they didn't show up. And, you know, a guy was pulled out of his car there and beat into the ground. And then they went ahead and destroyed this ice cream shop. I mean, it is a right-wing government. It is a hardcore right-wing activist base. And it's obviously teetering into maybe areas where people possibly may not have always or may not have felt this way prior. I mean, it's certainly getting just more and more further right over there.
And it's not a surprise. I mean, if you look at American history with regards to the Native Americans, like this psychological need to pathologize the violence of people you are subjugating. I mean, Fanon writes about this in Algeria too. Like this is just something that it's a cycle, and it's pronounced. I mean, it is terrifying when you see in Israel just dancing and celebrating and smashing the windows of a fucking ice cream shop. It's really disgusting. But I guess like I'm doing a lot of reading about in the 19th century America, and it is not surprising to me. It's just kind of, it seems a bit maybe anachronistic that we can see this in social media, but the dynamic is pretty familiar.
Right. And of course, there are people over there who are against what's going on, and there is a Israeli left. But I mean, much like I guess you can compare it most directly to, I don't know, right after during the Bush administration, you know, during the war drum beating for Iraq. I mean, when most of this country was whether they were Democrats or Republicans, pretty much behind that. And, you know, there were obviously very strong voices speaking out, but it wasn't the vast majority. So I maybe that's the most analogous you could get in terms of how it is over there. I don't know if that's, I don't know what anyone else would compare it to.
Well, also, I guess to speak of the right in the States, I think they're using like the logic of preemption, because I remember back when Jenkins, what's his name, Sam Harris, that joker, had their debate, they're using that same logic of preemption to justify the clearly outbalanced thing. Like, well, if the Palestinians had power, they would murder all of us. I've heard goofballs like Dave Rubin said. And they kind of, that's the logic they're using. Even when you guys reviewed Barry Weiss's thing, that's kind of the logic they're going on. Well, if the Palestinians had power, they'd just wipe out and kill all of us, or that type of nonsense, because that's the type of logic I'm hearing.
Right. And here's the thing that could easily, debunk that whole, thought experiment. The Palestinians aren't in power. I mean, you can live in this fantastical scenario where you imagine they would do the same to the Jewish people in Israel. But the fact of the matter is the Israeli government is in power here. They're the ones who are raining bombs and airstrikes down on the Palestinian people, who have no army, no way to defend themselves. And then they go ahead and point and say, look at Hamas. Well, what would they do to, but okay, all right. But they're not, I mean, we don't have, this is not an analogous situation here. Like, we're not living in a thought experiment. Israel is actually doing the thing you're imagining what Palestinians would do if they were in power.
Yeah, if Hamas was, like the point Michael made in that video, if Hamas was, affecting the basic survivability of Israelis, we would have a problem with that as well. like to the point where like deaths during birth are way higher in just one part of a country than another. Kind of obvious why that's happening.
I mean, just look at how people are. Just compare. I'm sorry. Are we cutting out or?
No. It's all good. One sec. I appreciate the call, Dave.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Yeah. Go on, Matt. Sorry.
Okay. No, I was gonna say just compare what you see online and on social media from people on the ground in both Gaza and in Israel when they share their experience. On the Israel side, you'll still see people posting, oh, there was an alarm and we had to leave our table at brunch and we couldn't finish brunch and we had to, go hide in some, shelter. And then we left after an hour and now back to the beach or whatever. Or you'll see someone, scared, crying, hiding, whatever. And again, they're like that. They share that. I was scared. I was afraid for my life. Okay, I get it. That sucks. But then you look at the Palestinian side, what are they sharing? Literal rubble of where buildings used to be. Hundreds of dead bodies of women and children. I mean, those are the two experiences, and we're seeing them from the ground. And you better believe that if Israel had those sort of images that the Palestinians have on their end, they would absolutely be using that as propaganda. They don't have that. The best they have are these images of people saying, oh, I had to run. And it's very unfortunate. They were scared for their lives. I wish them safety as well. I don't want to see any innocent civilians anywhere on any side die, but they are not experiencing the same thing.
That's a really good point about the images that would be used. It's just, I didn't think about it that way because all they've got is just like the threadbare propaganda from decades past, and the fact that media just took it and ran with it in the past. The wall is cracking, I'd say. I'm just going to read a few IMs and then we can get to some clips. Comrade Emma, a communist dog, says, a friendly West Coast reminder, Representative Tim Ryan was one of the very few Democrats to take on Nancy Pelosi on her looking forward and looking into the lies of W and the orange thing. That's a good point. I'm not saying Tim Ryan is an independent Democrat in the sense that he's not just going to like take the easiest votes all the time. But people remember Tim Ryan was pretty vociferously against Medicare for all, and I wrote the damn bill clip during the presidential primary. That was Bernie talking to Tim Ryan. So Tim Ryan's not, I would say, the worst of the worst, but he's fairly conservative on a number of issues. And the reason he was saying the China stuff is because of outsourcing in Ohio, and he tries to fashion himself as a pro-union Democrat. Just Kofefe says Manifest Destiny. I'm assuming that refers to Palestine. Comrade Mario says any good documentaries to recommend on the history of Palestine. On the history, no. I mean, there's a great documentary called The Gatekeepers. Is that not true? About that won a bunch of awards about essentially Israel and the 6-Day War. But I don't know, Matt, do you have any recommendations?
I don't. I actually would love recommendations as well. So I think we both have to, at least I have to look further into it for sure.
TLL says, Emma, thanks for setting your rhetorical trap about whether or not Sam loves the cats to get him to reveal the names of his cats. Are you a pet parent? And if not, what kind of fur baby would you first adopt? I'm not. I mean, my mother has a dog that who's old at this point, named Riley, and I love him very much.
What kind of dog?
He is a rescue mixed with a pit bull boxer lab. So he's we don't really know his full lineage, but that's what he's. A wonderful dog and incredibly playful and smart, too smart for his own good, to be honest with you. But I would probably get I feel a lot of guilt about getting a dog in the city, to be honest, without having a yard to play in. I haven't gotten over that, even though I have friends that have dogs and the dogs are perfectly happy. It's such a small space for a dog.
Don't feel bad about that, because there's so many dogs out there who are, on a list to be euthanized, that you would be giving any dog a better life just by bringing him to your home and taking care of him or her. Don't worry about that if that's really what's keeping you from getting a dog, which I suspect it's not.
The financial aspect is difficult, and also I think my boyfriend would want a cat first, to be honest.
Just a note on before we move on, because I was muted for the Israel-Palestine. People asking for sources. I don't know about documentaries. A book people should check out is 100 Years War on Palestine, The History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance, 1917 to 2017 by Rashid Khalidi. That I would highly recommend that. It's also available on Audible if you want the audiobook.
Did you see The Gatekeepers? I haven't seen it, but...
No, I haven't. I've seen Abby Martin's on the Empire Files doc. People should check that out on YouTube for free.
Yeah, we just referenced, I should have said, Abby Martin's documentary on this is probably a really good place to start, to be honest.
I do have to ask, Matt, when you said you were muted, were you talking that whole time and didn't realize it wasn't coming through?
No, so I have to double unmute because I have to unmute both on Zoom and on the mixer. So I realized, and then you guys started talking, so I'm like, all right, I'll catch you guys later.
Right.
Let's get into some of these clips, shall we? Matt, do you have any that sparked your interest? If not, I'm gonna want to start with Geraldo Rivera.
I actually assumed that Sam wanted to handle that one and covered it up top, and I missed it. So let's do it. I'm excited now that we get to do it.
Absolutely. So let me find it here. Geraldo Rivera and his powerful mustache, he's just drifting a lot further away from the Fox News orthodoxy than I thought he was capable of doing. He said the United States is complicit in war crimes in Gaza. He said that on Fox News. Let's take a listen to what he had to say, because this is fairly shocking coming from a longtime member of Fox News and generally just hearing this on Fox News.
And to promote peace in the Middle East. And now we are, 5 months now into the Biden administration. And here's what we see. It's impossible not to see some of the behind the scenes efforts to re-enter a deal with Iran at play here.
We have dozens of Palestinian children who have been killed in the last week with American bombs. I have no proposed solution to this conflict. I have no proposed solution. Better minds than mine. Maybe General Jack Keane can help. And floundered, frustrated by this complexity. I know this, though, Martha, and I want our audience to, the fact that the United States of America is providing Israel many of the weapons Israel's using today to kill Palestinian civilians without even demanding a ceasefire. Tlaib is right. That makes us complicit in an ongoing crime against humanity.
Katie, last thought.
Geraldo, that is such a dishonest argument to make, to accuse the Israelis and the Americans of deliberately targeting civilians when we know, we have it on video, we've known this for decades, the Hamas deliberately places military targets in schools, in media buildings, in hospitals, and when the Israelis call them to say, we're going to bomb, we're going to bomb, we are going to, so you're justifying Hamas using human shields in order to make the argument exactly as you are. And you are saying exactly what the argument Hamas makes, which is Israelis kill civilians, which is
an Israeli F-16 going 500 miles an hour is going to kill civilians.
Hamas propaganda. You are repeating Hamas propaganda.
I am deeply experienced in that region. I am a Zionist. I am telling you how I feel.
When they go out of their way to stop civilians from being killed, and Hamas purposely uses them as human shields. That is a known fact, and you are denying it.
All right, both.
That is a known fact. Okay, she accuses Geraldo of spouting propaganda there. That human shield thing is tired ass propaganda from like the Bush administration. They used to use that same playbook about Iraq and going after whoever they wanted. I mean, the amount of projection there is insane. Like, Geraldo Rivera said Rashida Tlaib is right. On Fox.
Right, on Fox, right.
A lot of people recognize Geraldo from his many, many years with Fox. So that's more impactful. Not that it's going to penetrate anybody's mind. I don't know why I'm being optimistic about a Fox News audience, but if it were to change like 2 or 3 minds, the fact that it's not some, guest coming in to argue with another host, the fact that it's Geraldo, it's a good thing.
I wonder how much longer he'll be on Fox after. He did it again, apparently, on Hannity's show. Do we have those clips too? But let's get to that in a minute. But
after you're done.
Yeah, but my question is like the idea, like, okay, so if you are someone on the Palestinian side and you are fighting back, and they use Hamas all the time, so fine, Hamas. I mean, where do you like? There is no war zone in terms of like a battlefield. Like, we're not fighting. This is not like a battle being fought in the mountains of, Afghanistan or, we are talking about people's literal home. Like, these are residential areas. Like, they're in Gaza's already as densely packed as it is. So they are going to be places where there are civilians just by the very reality of how this situation is taking place. Like, look at where
it is literally the 3rd or so densest place on Earth.
Yeah. Right. Like, so basically, by bringing up the human shields thing, you're basically saying that Palestinian people need to just sit there and take it because there's nowhere they can go. And he says there's nowhere to run for, and he's probably talking about people who are trying to escape, the area when there's some sort of rocket attack or whatever. I'm not even talking. I'm also talking about like people who are fighting. Like, where can they, like, there's nowhere. There isn't any like open battlefield. Like, I don't understand what people are imagining in their head. Like, this is just straight up propaganda. It's just straight up using these sort of human shields to just basically appeal to people's basic emotions and people just aren't taking a minute to think this through. If you attack a residential area and the people in that residential area want to defend themselves or fight back, I mean, where do they go? I mean, that's the reality of the situation of what's going on here. There is no Palestinian army that the IDF is attacking. There is no battlefield where only the people who signed up for a war are standing.
And again, what bothers me so much too is that no one is able to push back against the Hamas is a terrorist organization talking point. Like, yes, Hamas in the past has talked about the eradication of the Israeli state and by extension Jewish people, and that is obviously something that us on the left do not agree with, think that's awful. But the point is that Palestinians turn to Hamas as their governing body because they don't have the ability to actually govern themselves, because Hamas needs to recognize Israel's right to exist. Israel does not recognize Palestine's right to exist. They don't allow them to exist on an active daily basis, not just some dumb rhetorical, oh, you need to say it, say the word. Like, Hamas is the way that Palestinians are trying to govern themselves. And Israel is much more of a terroristic organization, not Israel itself, but the Likud party and the right-wing party that runs Israel, than even Hamas is, because just based on body count, they're both doing the same things, targeting civilians, and Israel's a lot more effective at it. So if you want to say Hamas is a terrorist organization, say that the Likud party and that Netanyahu is a terrorist, and then we can start...
And also, in the same breath, say that Israel helped create Hamas. This is a matter of mainstream news that Mehdi Hassan and The Intercept you can find recommended. They prefer Hamas as the opponent for precisely this propaganda reason.
Right. I mean, they helped prop up Hamas and put that, like, it's not like not even just the usual, like, there's another way they actively support Hamas, and that's by doing what they do, leaving people with no other active way. You just see in your whole entire family taken out. Right. Everyone you love in your life is dead. What do? You obviously are going to want some sort of retribution, some sort of revenge, because no one else is going to help you out. And who do you turn to? The one group in your home that's saying we're going to help fight back, and that's Hamas.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think it's not productive. It's not something that we advocate towards, but this is the natural radicalization of a group of people that's been denied clean water, electricity, healthcare, rights, basic human rights, ports of entry to their country, the ability to go out, the ability to come back into their country. I mean, the recognition that it's even a country. This is just an obvious endpoint to that kind of oppression, and then it's flipped around and treated as a terrorist organization, even though substantively Israel is killing way more civilians every time there's a conflict, which is the number one thing that terrorism should be centered around, the idea that an actor that's killing civilians, and it's just really because they think Hamas sounds scary. That's why they use it, because it's a Muslim name or it's an Arabic name, whatever it is. So it's
well, I mean, that's why all the work that has been done, I mean, Michael was particularly good at this, against the pathologizing of the Muslim world in the wake of 9/11, but also in the context of Israel-Palestine. Like, it's so clear what aims that serves, and that's just, it's not a right way to understand these conflicts.
All right. You want to play this? Want to get to this Hannity clip while we're at it?
Sure. You intro it.
All right, so Geraldo Rivera, fresh off of, who is that, Katie Pavlich? Fresh off of owning Katie Pavlich, decided to, I guess, also make the rounds and go on Sean Hannity last night, where he ran into his old arch nemesis. I feel like there's so many clips out there of these two fighting, but they really ramped it up to 11 on this episode. Dan Bongino. So here's Geraldo versus Bongino on Hannity.
Information and
stop
BS.
attacking
you did it
me,
on the
punk.
police thing.
Address the issue. Do you have the guts to address the issue and not address? This is not about me. You didn't come on this show to attack me.
Yourself.
You came on the show to talk about the issue.
Because again,
do you have a point about the issue?
Using your position of authority.
I'm sick of you, Bongino.
I'm
sick of you.
That are absolutely outrageous.
Geraldo,
You're
let
an
him talk.
uncontrolled lunatic.
Geraldo,
I'm sorry,
let him talk.
Because you can't go on the air.
I'm an out of control
Can you calm down? Yeah, you really need to calm down.
I'm a 10-time Emmy winner with deep experience in the Middle East. Have you ever even been there?
All right, I want to make my point, Sean.
I've covered every war since 1973.
I want to make my point when he stops talking.
Geraldo,
when he stops talking, I do have a point.
If your point is about me, I'm not going to stop. If your point's going to be about me, I'm not going to stop.
Geraldo Rivera does not understand that Hamas doesn't believe in Israel's right to exist. Hamas wants the Jews dead.
Well, apparently after that, Geraldo Rivera literally turns in his chair and puts his back towards the camera, which I guess is his own way of protest. And they let him stay on the air because I think Fox News knows what they're doing. They're not letting like they could easily, if they thought Geraldo was getting through to their audience, they think Geraldo looks insane, I think. And that's why they put him on air, because they like having his side, his opinion on this matter look foolish by having it come out of a guy who's turning around in his chair. And you know, there we go.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah, I mean, this is an incredible rivalry here, and I just wish Geraldo wouldn't lose it and throw a paper at the camera or turn his back around, because.
And there's nothing wrong with being a punk. I don't like that word as a derogatory term. Thank you very much.
It's incredible, but I mean, there's something about Bongino that specifically really triggers Geraldo, right? I think he is trying to get under Geraldo's skin by just like saying nonsense and attacking Geraldo's credentials. That seemed to be the thing that bothered Geraldo most there. Like, I'm a 10-time Emmy Award winner, etc. But like, good on Geraldo, at least in terms of just being passionate about this particular topic and not backing down. Maybe, you know, he can articulate his points more clearly on future Fox News appearances when he doesn't have to deal with his arch nemesis Bongino.
I think the thing with Bongino, with Geraldo, is like, what is this guy? What does he got? He doesn't have anything. Like, why is he such a big figure in the right-wing media? Like, he honestly, to me, just feels like a blank slate. Like, he's got no specific thing. He's like, if you
he did nothing at NRA TV, for instance, right? Like, he didn't do magic for NRA TV. It was when he was off that, and somehow he got into the wind stream.
Like, if you watch any of these guys, you can sort of tell how they've carved out their niche in the right-wing media industry. Like, you watch Shapiro, you can see why he appeals. You watch Charlie Kirk, even you could get James O'Keefe. They got some charisma in their own little world, and that sort of powers their popularity and what they do. Bongino is like, how is this guy like the top performer on Facebook day after day? There's nothing there.
Well,
There's
Matt,
just...
it's obvious, isn't it? It's like when when there's like those dog whistles where like, you can't hear what's happening. There's just like certain alpha energy coming off of Bongino that you and I just cannot feel.
I guess because he's a musclehead or something, but why not get Cernovich? At least he's got some sort of personality. There's some if you ever tuned into one of his streams, there is some sort of charisma in the guy. Like, Bongino's just so boring. It's like, I don't know. But clearly he gives them something they want.
That's why he and Geraldo can't be in the same place and are always fighting. Just too much alpha energy in one room, right? It's just like, can't house it all.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing. I would love to know, I know Geraldo's probably had some pretty decent takes on what's going on in the Middle East over the years, being that he's been there. But I wonder what made him decide that this is where he was going to take this stand so strongly. I wonder, if anything, that should show to you how much those, the cracks in the wall are growing. Geraldo decided to do that. Who knows if he'll be on Fox News for much longer on this topic, at least.
Let's take a quick call. And Matt, do you mind taking over? I will be right back. Just going to run to the...
Sure.
Calling from a 405 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Yes, this is me.
Who is me?
Okay, I'm Gregory from Oklahoma.
Hey, Gregory from Oklahoma. How you doing? What would you like to talk about today?
I honestly have no idea. I haven't called into the show in like a year and a half, and I kind of just wanted to make a point to do so because I wanted to for a long time. So hey everyone, Emma, you're doing a good job on the show. I've always wanted to say that for a long time. And all of you guys are doing good, and I'm glad you guys are all doing well. I also
well, thank you, Gregory. I appreciate it. Always nice to hear some words of encouragement. But if you don't got anything else, I'm gonna have to let you go, buddy.
All right, I wanted to plug my show right quick.
Really quick, go ahead. 2 seconds.
Yes. The Green Corn Rebellion show on YouTube. Everyone should go subscribe. I'm 20 subscribers away from 1,500.
All right, buddy. I've been on your show before. It's a good show. Take care.
Thanks. Bye.
All right, let's take the next caller. Do you guys have the call system up? Because I actually have it up. I could take the calls.
Go ahead.
Let's go to 647. What's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hi, Andrew from Toronto.
Hey, Andrew from Toronto. What would you like to talk about today?
Hi, so I just wonder what happens legally if GOP politicians get legal authority to count votes or to certify elections and they don't do the right thing?
I honestly don't know. I have no idea. I would have to get someone who does know on the show to talk about it. If they legal, I don't.
Ari Berman would be. I don't know off the top of my head, but I imagine if there's something urgent on the topic, Ari Berman will have addressed it at the Nation. So I would look to Ari Berman.
Right.
Yeah, a lot of people have been writing about that because Liz Cheney's ouster seems to lay the groundwork for potential serious crises in the future.
Right. Right. Well, we'll definitely take a look further into this and talk to someone who has the legal expertise behind what would happen.
Yeah, and I'd say that groundwork was laid by a lot of other things too. But yeah, I think it's all facing that. It's all trending in that direction.
Yeah, and then the other thing I was wondering is would you guys, by the way, I think this show's the best show on the internet in my opinion, so I want to compliment the show. And I just wonder, would you guys ever lay out for viewers kind of the thinking process that goes into how you prioritize topics and prioritize who to interview and prioritize questions and things like that?
I'm back, by the way.
Sounds like an idea for a behind the scenes like bonus episode or something, right? I don't know if there's
like what Sam picks.
Yeah, I would say, well, I guess I have maybe the best look into Sam's mind on a daily basis. Better when we were in the studio, but
is it still a deep, dark place?
Where? The studio?
No, I'm talking about his mind.
No, I think, in terms of, producing Sam's show, it's a mixture of like keeping your ears open for what's sort of like animating Sam and, what he's interested in and what he wants to talk about. I remember when I told him I was listening to, oh man, what's his name? The Yale professor who has a lecture series on Civil War and Reconstruction. Sam listened to all that in a weekend. And then for, months after that, he wanted, some guests on Reconstruction, and it became sort of like a lens through which he was seeing the Trump era. And I thought that was pretty cool. So, it's just about following, his sort of intuition.
And
He's
it depends,
got a mind for it.
It depends on the time of year too. Like often, sometimes we'll be more topical and news driven, like recently with multiple issues on Israel Palestine, and often there's not as much news, so we do historical stuff like that. But I do think it's a good I think, for instance, criticism of how long it took Hayes to get to the Palestine issue is warranted. I think that's a good lens to view news stories or news shows through. I also would note that Tucker Carlson's show has yet to discuss Israel-Palestine, and I'll just read some of his most recent topics. Lori Lightfoot, here's another one. Rat Wrangler to Chicago. Feral cats won't solve your rat problem. Dogs are more effective. Then he's got another one about UFOs, one about Ron DeSantis. So yeah, I think it is important, like what you dedicate your time. I think people's attention is like being trusted with a mass amount of people's attention is probably the most profound thing that all of us are entrusted with. And you should take it very, very seriously, I think. And I think you should criticize people who aren't.
Appreciate the call, man. Thank you.
Also, it depends what type of show you do. Like if you were doing if you had a very popular UFO show, then that UFO news is huge in your world. You know what I mean?
No.
Which means that, Tucker Carlson claims to do a general current events and politics show. And as Matt showed, how important is the what was it, a rat problem in your, or was it a mouse? What was it again?
Feral cats won't solve rat problem. Dogs are better. Here's another one from 5/19/2021. Kirstie Alley, I'm the girl who voted for Obama twice, but I wanted simple things like people to have jobs. Kirstie Allen on.
He interviewed Kirstie Alley on Scientology and anti-vaccine-isms.
Yeah, so right. I think it does reveal it's more revelatory than explicit identifications for what a show was trying to do.
Yeah, right. Story selection is an incredibly instructive way to look at a show. What's covered, what's not. So Kevin M says, I think Geraldo just doesn't want to be a Nazi. He has been fighting his party more than anyone else on Fox. Yeah, I mean, I got news for him about the Republican Party. Bottom Structure says, I think Bongino's appeals that he's a former Secret Service agent for Obama, and his shtick has always been that Obama/Dems are corrupt, and he had firsthand knowledge and expanded that into the deep state conspiracies under Trump. That's a good way to look at it, but it's just like, yes, the Secret Service does not have incredible amounts of knowledge about the behind the scenes corruption of the deep state. I've got news for you.
Right. I mean, if anything, him going out there shows the Secret Service got a real problem. If this is the guy that's supposedly supposed to take a bullet for Obama over that 8-long-year period, and here he is, doesn't seem like he would. He would have if it came down to it. You know what I mean?
It sounds like he was an Obama simp, more like it, because he was protecting the guy. Panda says Laura Boebert posted a picture and comment of having a great time meeting with J.D. Vance. I hope my liberal friends will take another look at themselves after holding up Hillbilly Elegy as a work of art. I mean, the amount of arguments I've had about Hillbilly Elegy with my certain members of my family is...
It's amazing how often the left is in the position of being called like party poopers or like closed-minded about something and then being proved exactly right about that thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's like you just have to wait maybe like 6 months or something, and then it's, even though it's out of the public's consciousness, you're completely vindicated, unfortunately.
I gotta say, maybe it shows what circles I run in and where I pay attention to stuff, but I had honestly not even heard of this damn thing until the movie.
Well, it was after Trump got elected, and there were some like limousine liberals claiming that this book was a window into the mind of the Trump voter, when really it was just blaming white people for their poverty instead of blaming black people for their poverty.
Didn't we discuss last week about how limousine liberals are to blame for so many of the terrible people who now have a platform? Like it was when we were talking about Barry Weiss, wasn't it? I think so. Like, she had a little bit of notoriety beforehand, but then she became a figure we must all listen to and talk about when the fucking New York Times brings her on board. I mean, these limousine liberals are literally like the main problem, honestly. Like, they didn't shine a spotlight on some of these dregs of humanity, then I mean, they would never be nothing more than like an annoying a-hole online, like a Cernovich.
A lot of them they aren't even shining a light on. It's just like they're keeping the wheels turning, basically. And this is the next thing up in line, and don't rock the ship too much. Like, just keep it rolling. Like, and don't criticize too much.
Yeah, I mean, I think San Francisco is one of the worst examples of this. You look at the Chesa Boudin recall stuff, all led by these venture capital freaks that are trying to run basically the type of panic that was tried on Krasner.
Right.
And they really do think, like, they do honestly believe in their heart of hearts that they're in touch with the rest of the ordinary people. Like, they really feel like their view is the mainstream view on this because they're in their little bubble. It's amazing to see. Well, I mean, we saw what happened with Krasner. We saw what happened there. Again, it's just smoked it in the election.
Trench warfare, right in Tim Tebow period. Or trench warfare. That's funny. Yeah, dude. Urban Meyer's a fucking idiot. Oh, he won the national championship. Ohio State, Florida. He is not smart, and I feel terrible for. Yeah, it's really easy to win the national championship when your schools have like a ton of money and you cannot pay any of your players.
He's playing or coaching?
He's coaching. Oh no, Tim Tebow? No, they signed him as a tight end. He hasn't been in the NFL in 9 years. He played one snap at tight end for the Jets, and it bounced off his helmet. He ran a 4.8, 11 years ago, 10 years ago. He's not like, it's for the culture. You know what's going to be bad for the culture? When there are a bunch of players that deserve a spot on that roster, on that 90-man roster, and one of them's going to Tim Tebow.
I think it's funny. I think they should draw this bid out as long as they can and like sign Tim Tebow to a player contract when he's like 48 or something like that.
I mean, at this rate, if Urban Meyer's still in the NFL, he's going to be like trying to pay him $20 million a year to be like the long snapper or whatever the fuck.
It is really funny that Tim Tebow, like, talk about, not able to play athletes. Back when Tim Tebow was playing for Florida, I used to buy the NCAA football games and literally manually enter all the name information on like the major teams just so it would look, it wouldn't just say quarterback 11. And I remember Tebow, I manually entered Tebow, and Chris Leak was also a quarterback of the Gators at that time. And I don't know, just funny that full circle we're still talking about that guy. But he was a beast in college.
Yeah, I mean,
I got nothing to add to this convo.
Tebow can't throw the football. Look up Tim Tebow's throwing motion. He like had decent athleticism at a time when like people weren't able to scheme around that. And he had Aaron Hernandez on his team. He had Percy Harvin on his team. Like he had both those Pouncey brothers on his offensive line. He had some like real studs on defense too. I just think he's like one of the most overrated players I've ever seen in my life. But there's a cult around him, and it's like the MAGA cult and the Tim Tebow cult. The Venn diagram is just a circle. But I digress. All right, let's do another clip. This one is particularly fun for me because I love talking about fail sons. So Andrew Giuliani, son of Rudy Giuliani, is running for governor of New York. He thinks he's got a real killer line to bolster his bona fides in the upcoming New York gubernatorial election in 2022. Let's hear him try it the first time, and then he does it the second time.
The Treasury Department out of the public liaison. And the truth is, Martha, from an experience perspective, I may be 35 years old, but you got to remember, I spent 32 years, parts of 32 years in politics and in government. I'm the only announced candidate that actually has spent parts of 5 decades in politics. So I may look young, but I certainly feel a lot older.
You know, Lee Zeldin is also running to be the Republican nominee. He's already...
Okay. Before we weigh in, he does it again. You may have not caught it, but it rhymes with Schmive Shekades. Go to the other clip.
Yeah. So what I say is I've spent parts of 5 different decades in politics, 32 years in politics, right? Everything from...
What?
So,
what does he mean?
What?
Yeah, it's so confounding.
He means that he was born in the 80s. He's 35, so he was 4 years old in 1990, but the first 4 years, he spent those 4 years as a toddler in politics, just like being in the arena or in the same home as his father, Rudy Giuliani. Then the 90s, that's 2. Then the 2000s, that's 3. Then the 2010s, that's 4. And now, look, we're in the 20s right now. That is literally the claim. Play it back. That's what he's trying to...
I mean, that is ridiculous. I think the even more ridiculous than that is this contention that everyone tells him that he looks young. Because I think, like, he misunderstood them. I think what they were saying is, you look like Hellboy. But...
He does have that Hellboy forehead.
I mean, shout out. Ron Perlman, distinctive guy, but doesn't look young.
Yeah. Keep going.
I'm still trying to wrap my head around the 5 decades thing.
The 5 decades thing is like factually true, but the weirder part is I've spent parts of 32 years in politics. How does he determine like which years, which parts, and why 32? It seems rather arbitrary when he's 35.
And can you claim that you spent your time in politics when you were learning your ABCs? Like, how is that a legitimate political experience? Like, this guy has fudged his resume so many times. He was like an intern for some bank in college, I'm sure, and he basically said he was the executive vice president or something like that. That's the kind of vibe I get off of him.
Well, a lot of people are just discovering he was actually officially part of the Trump administration. He was the guy responsible for like being the liaison between the White House and like the sports teams of the world, which obviously, being that all the sports teams basically passed on going to the White House when Trump was there, he did a real bang up job with that one.
Yeah, I mean, never in the history of administrations has it been more clear and obvious that sports teams did not want to be at the White House. So he probably did the worst job possible at that role. Play the rest of that Newsmax clip and we can make fun of him a little bit more.
So what I say is I've spent parts of 5 different decades in politics, 32 years in politics, right? Everything from seeing how City Hall was changed to working in the White House with their top CEOs in the United States, right? So we've continued to work through the Paycheck Protection Program in there to help make sure that New Yorkers and all Americans had an opportunity when things were shutting down to have their paycheck and businesses survive. I specifically was involved in the MTA CARES Act funding to make sure that thousands of New York jobs.
Pause it. That's a picture of him with his dad in his first political campaign. He says 32 years, I think, Brendan, to answer your question, because he's like, it's a little bit of a stretch to say I was in politics when I'm 3, right? Or when I'm 2. That's like beyond my memory. So as soon as I have my first memory, I spent it in politics. That's experience. It's a way to really just, beef up your resume when you're a 35-year-old.
I was in telecommunications since I was 3, sales particularly because of my dad. So I have when I was 21, I had about 18 years. Parts of 18 years of telecommunications experience.
Right.
It's incredible.
Also, I wonder if he, because of his role as like, you know, prop to his dad, is like, that's why I was involved in politics, which he was famously made fun of by Chris Farley in SNL.
So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I bet that was funny.
Oh, speaking of
oh right.
I guess Andrew is joining me here. Today, we put our differences aside.
Chris Farley saw. I'm sorry. He saw it, right?
Yeah, he did. He knew the future.
Speaking of the New York governor, being that's what Andrew Giuliani would like to be. Did you see this breaking news that just came out about Andrew Cuomo and his brother?
I did.
Yeah, Chris Cuomo, the CNN anchor, took part in strategy calls advising his brother, Andrew Cuomo, on how to respond to the sexual harassment allegations. CNN agrees it was inappropriate, but says the anchor will not be disciplined.
This is more anti-Italian discrimination.
I know,
this is just a family meeting, and you can't, you know, it's ridiculous.
They're discriminating against the Italian family, right? We all know that Italians like to be involved. They like to involve family and business, right? You know?
Yeah.
Famous.
Yeah.
So not allowing for the space for the Cuomos to act like the mob is anti-Italian discrimination. People are pulling
unbelievable
Chris Cuomo tweet where it says conflict of interest ? In response to Jared Kushner's sister urges Chinese investors to invest in real estate projects citing family ties. Again, I mean, like it would be different if Chris was, you know, talking to his brother on the phone, like, here, this is how you can deal with this. I know, weather this storm. I'm here for you, brother. But the fact that he's taking part in calls specifically, that's like, I'm not shocked at all, but of course.
Yeah, that's a problem. It was also a problem when CNN was allowing him to cover his own brother and do like basic like a playtime on cable news between the brothers. Like, it was disgusting. And then they finally said, okay, we're not going to do that anymore because we can no longer deny how awfully he handled it, even though we tried to distract you from that for months. So of course CNN doesn't give a shit, and it's every bit egregious as I don't know. Like, I hope the right catches on to that, because CNN deserves flack. Like, it's disgusting, and it's always been gross.
Yeah, pull up this clip that I just sent, because if you guys remember, Bernie Sanders' son ran for Congress, and Chris Cuomo tried to get Bernie to endorse his son on air, and this was just like another incredibly principled moment from Bernie. He said, I'm not going to get involved in this. I don't believe in dynasty politics, essentially. So I just sent it, guys. Sorry to spring that on you, but I just think this is super relevant.
Let me ask you one thing about politics before I let you go. And by the way, I told you we would talk policy for most of this interview. I told you I'd keep my promise. So that's one thing. You've never talked about this plan as much as you have on this show tonight. And this is just the first of our conversations. We'll do it a lot between now and the midterm.
Hey, aren't I the best?
I want to ask you one more question about politics. Your son's running for Congress. You say, I won't endorse him because I don't like dynastic politics. Why? It's only two of you. I got two in my own family. That's no dynasty.
Well, actually, I have more than two. My son is running on Medicare for all, raising the minimum wage. He's running on programs that
he's like a better-looking Bernie, that guy.
I think that, you know, I don't believe in dynastic politics. He's on his own. He's going to speak to the people of New Hampshire, and I'm sure he's going to do very well.
But you can't cut your son loose, though. I know your brother's running, but
Chris,
he's in the UK.
Chris, I don't believe in dynastic politics.
I know you don't.
I believe that that's what my view is.
Do you know
and
what
I think, and I'm proud that he is standing up for the working people of New Hampshire. He has worked hard for working people and low-income people his whole life. And that's what I happen to believe.
Who's better for working people, you or him?
Yeah.
What?
He's doing a great job. We'll let the voters in New Hampshire make that decision.
Just
I
unserious.
grew up with that question being asked. I always love to see people struggle with it. Senator Sanders, I appreciate you taking this.
That was like, Bernie was pissed.
Yeah.
I mean, one, he clearly said he was uncomfortable by the question, right? And it's just like, yeah, once he initially declines to endorse, you don't need to say who's better for working people, you or him, ha 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 ha, because that's like indicative of how the Cuomos are kind of or specifically Andrew Cuomo treats politics. It's a game, right? We're just presenting some sort of facade about working people and la-di-da, where, you know, Bernie and probably the rest of his family were interested in it on a substantive level, not a competition level. By the way, might say a little bit about how Chris sees relationships between family members. A little bit competitive there. Who's better? Who? Rank it. Right.
That was a good catch. Right. I mean, I guess
Mario ranked us. Oh.
Right. Yeah. That was, you know, these guys. My God. I mean, the Cuomos are both Cuomos are horrible. I mean, only one of them though is actually has the ability to I don't know, put elderly people in nursing homes during a pandemic and let them all get sick, and many of them die. And I still can't believe there's been nothing from that so far. Nothing.
I got another rundown from Jack Murkison on Twitter. Chris Cuomo got secret access to COVID tests, helped launder his brother's reputation on TV, privately, and then, as this story is, privately advised Andrew about the extensive misconduct allegation against him and called them, quote, cancel culture. So, yeah. That says all you need to know about the credibility of CNN.
All right.
Let's.
You want to go to the calls?
Yeah, to the calls. Wait. Hold on. I'm doing it again. Hold on. Just everyone, shut up. Shut up.
What am I shutting up about? I don't even know what's going on. What are you doing again?
To the calls.
Charge.
Let's do it.
I've got the power. Calling from a 360 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Justin from Bremerton. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
I wanted to talk about housing and how we can better explain how the federal government no longer pays for that. You know what I'm saying? I heard that there's a law about that, and that federal money can no longer be used to help with housing.
I'm sorry, caller. Can you? I'm having a little bit of trouble hearing you, or kind of, you know. Can you repeat what you said?
Okay. I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay, he hung up. I mean,
I heard, and I'm not familiar with what he's talking about, that federal money can no longer be used for housing. I'm not quite sure what he's saying.
Yeah. So,
what dollars and what capacity? Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, it sounded like a good topic. Sorry we weren't able to chat a little bit more about it. So we'll just take another call. Calling from a 646 number, 646. Who's this?
Hey, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
This is Ralph. I'm on Red Lantern 161 in the chat. Hello to everybody there. Just wanted to make a few quick lines and then I'll hang up and listen.
Sure.
First of all, you guys brought up the Fight Club. First rule is we just don't talk about it. I thought you guys knew that.
You know, that's Alex's fault. Caller Alex from New York. He's the one who's breaking the rules. We have to respond though.
And the other part is, so you guys were mentioning how tall Charlie Kirk was. I mean, I have a 2-year-old here, and I don't know what you guys are reading, but he's about as tall as she is, and she's like only 3 feet. So most of these right-wing guys are typically that high anyways, but
gotcha.
I'll be here all week on there, but yeah, that was a bad one. I'll hang up and listen later. Bye.
Bye, Rob.
You didn't leave us with anything. But usually when you say I'll hang up and listen, there's a lingering question you requested us to answer.
Look, I appreciate, and Sam would appreciate the effort and efficiency, though.
That's true. Let's take another call.
Yeah, calling from a 203 number. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello.
Hello.
I was wondering what you guys
thought about.
Need your name.
Oh, James.
James. How you doing?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I was wondering what you guys thought about Glenn Greenwald and his statement about the Intercept and these Gab reporters, the reports on Gab.
Oh, well, I mean, I disagree with Glenn's statement. I mean, how is what extremists are doing on a particular platform built to basically cater to them in order for them to organize, message with each other, because they're not able to on other more mainstream platforms where it could be seen by many more people. How is details surrounding those people not important to mention? I mean, from what I've seen, there's a good amount of people on Gab, and the reporting that's being done isn't like just like picking like a bunch of randos out from obscurity and just, look at like what Bob from Bumblefuck, Illinois has said. No, this is they're looking at details and data from either people who are known in that world, who have some sort of notoriety, or to B, people who have involved themselves in something of sort of notoriety, such as, storming the Capitol building on January 6th, or even C, obviously, I would say certain types of, privacy goes out the window if you're making specific kinds of threats on a certain platform. On any platform, I would say, actually. So, I mean, it's not like they're just like bothering a bunch of no names for having, conservative views on a right-wing platform. No, there's a reason they're usually reporting on those people. And that reason has to do with pertinent information, if you ask me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know about his stance on Gab. I mean, you kind of filled it in there, Bender, but at the very least, like...
Did I miss anything, caller? Was there any specific take that, because I might not have hit it all. What was there something more specific?
I think he got a ton of the info that led to information on Intercept reporters being released publicly, and them and their spouses and families were getting death threats from how he sort of went on the attack on them, which I think was pretty disgusting.
Oh yeah, the thing I most paid attention to in that whole thing, the Gab thing is obviously, but they haven't really. I don't think we've seen most of what's going to come out of that Gab stuff. So I don't think that was the main. But for him, the main issue was that video the Intercept put out on those conservative, quote unquote, journalists who call themselves the Riot Squad, who literally just like go out whenever there's some sort of protest or demonstration, usually in the wake of an unarmed black man being killed by police. They go out and they basically farm the streets for viral content. They're on the lookout for things that'll, like, it's the equivalent to like World Star, but like for the right wing set. I mean, they literally call themselves the Riot Squad. They work together. I mean, it's fine what they're doing from like a legal aspect. Like, they're not doing anything illegal, but they're also doing something very public, and they're doing something that's very, if you ask me, interesting and worthy of reporting on. And this video series basically covered them, that they do this. I don't see an issue with it. I don't know why why he had an issue with it, other than, I mean, he laid out why he did in terms of exactly everything I just, fought up against there. But I mean, I just don't understand it. How is that not the equivalent of covering any other like media critique type of piece or medium? Like Glenn,
which is all that Glenn is doing now.
Yeah, that's Glenn's whole thing, media critique. I mean, even beyond that, like, are we not allowed to shine a light on the people who like beat the war drum for the Iraq war because they're in the media? I mean, I don't understand. Like, what's the line he's drawing here?
Yeah, I don't know. He's just, it's beyond me, sort of the direction he's gone after he left the Intercept.
Well, it's very lucrative. It's very lucrative, and honestly, like, I
mean, $2 million a year on writing on Substack,
Do we know that?
I had a he's making $2 million on Substack.
I don't know specific details, so I just want to know for sure.
He's not. We should put this. I deal with facts, and I'm not gonna. And I know he has a problem with people stating this, and they're wrong for doing it because it's been debunked. He is not being paid directly by Substack. He is not part of that Substack program. He is paid directly via Substack system through subscribers. I do think that is an important distinction, but I want to make that distinction. But I mean,
it's much more than his salary from The Intercept, I think.
Oh, I'm sure it is, right? I mean, I recently had a debate with Greenwald on Twitter where there was that writer who wrote some biography. I don't even remember who it is, honestly, but it came out that this guy, when he was teaching in school, he was like an 8th grade teacher or something, that he was grooming his 8th grade students, and he'd keep tabs on them and contact them throughout the years. And then once they're old enough, he would reach out to them and have relationships with them. Like, it came out, this guy was a real creep. Like, and his book publisher dropped him and said they're not gonna publish the book anymore. And he came out and he was against this. He said it was censorship and how they had, there was no, they should not be doing this. It's cancel culture. And I had a debate with him, like, there's nothing wrong with doing that. You can literally, and he was like, oh, but they're being, their speech is being stifled by the mob. Or no, like, the company just cares about the bottom line. They don't care about, the accusations or anything like that. Companies have no morals. They're not, the company isn't hurt by this in terms of, I can't believe. No, they made a decision to pull the book because they saw the outrage to the piece and they said, oh, this is going to hurt us somewhere down the line if we continue publishing this guy monetarily, financially. And that's why they did it. I mean, and I'm sure there's in their contracts with writers, it states there are different things that if you hurt the company in any way or something comes out about you, we have every right to pull the deal or whatever. I mean, it's not that, like, but he was like on this crusade that it was some like free speech issue.
Yeah, and also just one other note on that book is my understanding it was like an authorized author, a Philip Roth memoir. Which, if you know anything about authorized biographies, like, it's not like you're getting the unvarnished truth from that anyway. Like,
right. I mean, to me, like, caller, we're gonna hang up in a sec, but my one point would just be, and I know that this is like kind of about him personally, but there are a lot of good people that work at The Intercept, and this is a company that he founded and created, and I think it says a lot about a person when they're doing a scorched earth campaign against a lot of like great people, documentedly so, who used to work with them.
Yeah, I would specifically on that like to see him respond to what Jeremy Scahill said about that a while ago, but
I think he did actually respond to it.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah.
But I think Scahill's. I think it is like I think it is gross to attack an outfit that still do like every news organization, particularly ones that are funded by billionaires, are going to have problems that can be criticizable, but just to completely poison the well when it comes to an organization that I think does a lot more great work than coming out of those Substacks, I'll just say, is I think gross.
I mean, he's got every right, obviously, to criticize it or whatever. But I mean, the way he sort of, I don't know, the way he goes at it, and the way he sort of knows it'll rile up a certain base of his subscribers and readers. It's like, I mean, there's ways to critique things that won't send a fervent mob after the people you're critiquing.
All right, let's read some IMs and then we will jump. So Dave Rubin, Democrat, says he's referring to the Faircloth Amendment, which prohibits federal money from being used to create new public housing units. This was the caller from Washington. So once they're demolished without plans to rebuild them, there's a permanent loss of federal money for public housing. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Hegemony Cricket says, in 1984, my next door neighbor gave me a campaign button that said, I'm glad I didn't vote for Reagan, which is true. I didn't vote for Reagan at age 7 or for Ford at age 3. Parts of 6 decades there and 9 presidential administrations. That's incredible. Big Dick Cheney Energy says, Bernie was too classy to drop a "who's better" for nursing home residents. You or your brother. This was in 2018, so that would have been incredibly prescient of him. Not sure Chris would have understood what was going on there. J Bag says Andrew Giuliani's career spanning 5 decades is literally a Simpsons joke. More importantly, Binder, my wife and I are wondering if you shave your Cupid's bow or if it's just patchy. No judgments. I got 2 holes on my jawline.
I don't even know. Let's just keep going.
I have no idea.
Beard.
Yeah, I got no. I think I could guess, but I don't know where this is coming from.
I didn't know exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for reading that one, Emma.
I was like, oh, one directed towards Matt, and didn't proofread it before. So Chardonnay Socialist says, haven't followed team sports in decades, but I could listen to Emma trash Tim Tebow all day. That guy sucks. Speaking of Tim Tebow, and I will keep this very brief, didn't advocate for players getting paid in college. He came out against it, by the way, which, like, it's kind of essentially, I mean, like, one of the grossest things you can do to your former teammates who didn't have the fame and adoration that you had, by the way. So Saul Rosenberg says, yes, Orthodox Jews wearing signs that say Free Palestine, waiting for Alex Jones to say they're Soros funded.
Oh, wait a minute. We are, at least I did, that the Cupid's bow is just your thing on your lip, upper lip here. I never knew that's what it was called.
Oh, that's nice.
Oh, okay. No, it's just, it can't grow. That's it. That's what you see is what you get. I don't do any fancy work up there to make it look that way.
Oh, there you go. The Tim Caucus says, I feel like the housing caller talking about the Fair Cloth Amendment that limits the ability to construct public housing in this country. Yes, thank you so much. Red Guardian says,
sorry, I'm dying over here over what we thought that could have possibly meant.
A little bit. Binder, what do you think about the WWE zombies? Pretty lame, huh? Says Red Guardian.
It was very, it was very silly.
Yeah.
Basically, WWE had literal people dressed up as zombies to come in and end a match. Like, they basically took one of the wrestlers out and pretended to eat him in the ring. Even though I'm sure he will be, I haven't watched since that, so I'm sure he's already shown up. And if not, I'm sure he'll be back on TV soon, which I'd love to see them explain that. But they won't. They'll just carry on and pretend it never happened like they usually do when they can't find a way to write themselves out of a bad storyline.
Right. All right.
They did. I will drop this really quick. They did just release their referee in NXT, who they've employed for quite some time now, who has gotten a lot of mainstream news coverage, well, mainstream as in outside of wrestling news coverage, for being a hardcore spreader of QAnon conspiracies and COVID misinformation. I don't know what took so long. I don't know what was going on. Wrestlers have since come out and said they felt uncomfortable working with him. They believed he was a racist. He had spread Proud Boy paraphernalia while working. He had showed up at like community board meetings spreading COVID disinformation while wearing his referee uniform, where it was clearly, where the WWE NXT logo was clearly visible on his shirt. I mean, I don't know what was going on and how he was he walked out of a diversity meeting they had during the George Floyd protests last year because he was against the idea of them. I mean, this guy got away with a lot over the years, and they just released him, and you would have known all about it a year ago if you listened to my show, doomedcast.com. Also, I'm doing a live stream tonight at 9 p.m. Eastern time at youtube.com/Matt Binder. Please be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Go to youtube.com/Matt Binder and subscribe.
All right. And the final I am of the day. I love the power of the soundboard. NJ Canfield says, saw 2 surveys last week claiming that millennials can't wait to get back to the office, cited in major newspapers. One done by WeWork, the other done by the global real estate company who took a dive investing in my office building before the pandemic. That is very indicative of some of these papers. They like don't care about the motivation behind the survey. Matt, Brendan, thank you so much for helping me produce the show today, or producing the show today, I should say, helping me with the show. And Binder, thank you as always for your wonderful contributions and insights.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to join you guys on Thursday afternoons.
What is happening on Doomed? I
just said it all. But oh yeah, tonight we're doing an episode on what's going on in Palestine and Gaza, and I'm going to have on someone from the American Muslims for Palestine organization, and we'll be diving into what's happening, and also how you can basically, in your conversations with people every day, when they bring up a lot of those talking points like, oh, what about Hamas and Israel's right to defend itself? We're going to go through those and, break them down for you, hopefully in a way where you'll be able to go out in your, in your everyday life. And when when these people approach you with these sorts of things, you'll have a good way to respond. That's at youtube.com/Matt Binder.
All right, guys, great show. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie.